Testing. How's it sound now? I'll keep talking. Testing, 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 testing. Sound, talking, 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 talking. Good? Awesome. All right, guys, so just a quick announcement, real quick. Everyone has to move up because not only are we going to get a little weird, but I'm giving away a free copy of this game to one of these random seats. I'm dead serious, so you got to move. I've already pulled the number, but I'm not going to tell you which one. I know. All right, good morning. So last chance, look at all those people sitting at the tables who are gonna have no chance to win a free copy of Her Story. They're just giving up. They're just giving up. That's too bad. All right, so before I begin, I just want to say real quick, it really is an honor to be speaking to you this morning. When I first started going to games and education about 4 or 5 years ago, it's not an exaggeration that it changed my life personally and professionally. So I think Matt and Toby and all the people who are far too many to name deserve a big round of applause. But let's get to kind of what we're really here to talk about. So these are my 2 daughters and my lovely wife. And our favorite hobby right now is trying to put me in timeout. And Cordelia is going to the bathroom. But of course, they're adorable. So that's okay. I'm a 7th and 9th grade English teacher at Fairfield Country Day School, which is an all-boys school, pre-K through 9 in Fairfield, Connecticut. And I've been doing game-based learning probably for about the last 5 years or so, and teaching for about 9. So it definitely wasn't something that I got into right away, even though that seed was always planted. It just took a little time to grow. So before we move on to talking about some of the specifics, the good news is if you're here, you're probably already beyond many of the kind of stereotypes and barriers that people put up when they want to embrace games and games and learning. And in my experience, it's usually not students, it's usually not parents or even admin who are the first to put up walls. It's usually other teachers. And the excuse that I hear over and over again is, I'm not a nerd, I'm not a gamer, I can't do it. And like I said, you're probably a little bit beyond that, or at least willing to get beyond it if you're here. So this is probably aimed more at hesitant colleagues and friends that you might have. But let's take a few moments to kind of break down some of those barriers that I think are completely fictional. So this is often how we think about a gamer, right? Solitary, male, white, obsessive. He's probably on his 9th hour, of Call of Duty. And it's not really accurate anymore, but we still do see this quite a bit. And I would submit that this is probably a far more accurate picture of a gamer. Social, male and female, analog. It's a board game. I believe they're playing Ticket to Ride, from what I can see. And I feel this is a much more accurate picture. And fortunately, the research backs it up as well. So let's take a minute to talk about gamers. The Entertainment Software Association puts out a great demographic report every year. And in the last few years, it's definitely been very heartening to see what the numbers look like. So 63% of U.S. households have at least one person who plays video games regularly. I believe they define that as a few times a week, maybe more than 3 or 4 hours, I forget. And likely in those households, it's usually more than one person. So it's usually probably a parent and a child, siblings, or all of the above. Boys younger than 18, which is the stereotype as a gamer, are actually a surprisingly small slice of the pie. Women 18 and older are 31% of game players. 31%. Those kind of stereotypical boys are half that. So it's male and female. And 54% of the most frequent gamers play with others. So it's not an isolated experience. It is social, more often than not. And in addition, board game sales increased by 28% last year, and that number's been going up for several years. And you could be tempted to think, oh, okay, baby boomers are beginning to retire. They're trying to get their kids and their grandkids off their darn phones, reclaiming some of the family activities of the past. And that's probably true, and that's great. But millennials, the ones who are addicted to their phones and don't want to engage with anyone face to face, they're the ones who are driving this board game explosion. So again, it's not an isolated experience. And you may have seen this commercial from ESPN a few years ago, and I think it does a great job of laying out, I think, a pretty important fundamental message.
This dude has a sick board.
That guy's a stud.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, EWP equals runs scored squared divided by the sum of runs scored squared plus runs allowed squared. You definitely got that backwards.
Oh, right, I flipped it.
It's whatever. Look, check this out. Lincecum has a whip of 1.23 at home, but 1.20 away. What do you think accounts for that 0.03 difference?
Nerds.
Whatever, Gary.
So I think that neatly lays out, I think, what's a pretty important truth, and that's we are all nerds. What matters really is just what type of nerd we are, what flavor do we come in. And it could be sports, it could be games, it could be chess, anything goes. We are all nerds. So I think that barrier that many people put up where I can't participate in this with my students because I'm not a part of it, you are. It just depends on what type. So let's talk about unreliable narrators, which was kind of the focus of the most recent game-based unit that I did that I'll talk about this morning. And an unreliable narrator is essentially one who is lying, concealing information, and misjudging. And all narrators in a fiction are false because it's fiction, but there are some who imitate the truth, and some imitate people who lie. And I've always been interested in this just as a reader because I feel it's kind of the most playful form of literature when all of a sudden, that narrator violates this kind of the sacred trust that you're trusting everything that they say is true to what's going on in the fiction. And when they violate that, all of a sudden you have to start kind of sparring with them mentally as you're reading what they're telling them. So I always found it a very enjoyable, playful experience. But it went further than just something that I think was fun and interesting on a literary level. And that's because in today's world, especially with our students, they're being besieged by unreliable narrators. On TV, in their social media feeds, on the street, on the bus, everywhere. We're living in a world where almost anything goes as far as what narrative you want to tell. Don't worry, guys. Bigfoot is fine. Lil Wayne's fine. These are all false. And of course, we see this all the time in the classrooms, and I'm sure every teacher in this room remembers the great clown scare of 2016. Where it seemed that every student was convinced that killer clowns were going to become running out of the woods and murder everybody. Schools were put on red alert, for several weeks back in the fall. And so I think it's an important kind of aspect and skills for them to develop. But I really like this list from the National Council of Teachers of English that they compiled a few years ago. Identifying what they saw as the fundamental 21st century skills that we should be teaching our students to develop. And, it's things like proficiency and fluency with technology, solving problems collaboratively and strengthening independent thought, designing, and then also sharing information, because if we're designing great pieces of information and art and media with our students, but we're keeping them within the cloister of the classroom, I think we're really doing them a disservice, because everything is networked today, and they need to know not only how to design something, but how to get it out there and have an impact. Managing, analyzing, and synthesizing multiple streams of simultaneous information. Sometimes, as the adults, who grew up on more kind of isolated mediums, we can think, okay, we need to teach them to focus on one thing at a time and nothing else. And that's true. That's a very valuable skill for deep reading and others. But we need to help them be able to, filter the avalanche of media that's coming at them, as well as critiquing, creating, analyzing, and evaluating multimedia texts. If it's just print, we're missing out on teaching them how to deal with a variety of the other mediums that they are already engaged in. As Paul Darvasi talked about yesterday, we've got to meet our students where they are, and we can either help them where they are or we could not. And of course, attending to the ethical responsibilities, being a good digital citizen. So let's start getting unreliable here. So I decided to start inspired by games. Start easy, level 1, and then work our way up. And so level 1, is the obvious unreliable narrator. Start something easy, killing rats in the basement type of thing. And that is Charles by Shirley Jackson. I'll try to avoid spoilers, but I'll do my best here. And Charles is a great story because it's the story with an unreliable narrator that when you get to the end, you know that the narrator was unreliable, and you know exactly how they were unreliable. And it's just kind of your basic twist ending. So when you go back and read it again, you see, oh, that was the truth the whole time. And so it's a good way to teach them that how a narrator can be unreliable, but have a very concrete conclusion about exactly how and why they were unreliable. So this is what I developed to help them deal and grapple with these unreliable narrators as they read. And I found a great resource. I can't remember the name of the teacher. I'll post it up on my blog and post it'll be going up this week for anything you might have missed. And I took what some of the fundamental questions that he kind of targeted and how do you assess an unreliable narrator, and I expanded them and then turned this into a table that they could use to fill out for notes as they read. And it's got a bunch of key investigative questions and then boxes for all the different reasons that a narrator might be unreliable. Self-interest, ignorance, emotion, inexperience, immorality, inconsistency. And those boxes are for their textual evidence. They had to pull the quotes, page numbers. This is kind of your typical close reading exercises and very targeted for getting them to assess these narrators. And they had to fill these out for all of the stories that we did as we did this unit. So, moving up, level 2, the mastermind narrator.
You want to know how I got these scars?
Yeah, and so we looked at the Joker from The Dark Knight because he is kind of a fun example of an unreliable narrator because he tells different stories throughout the movie about how he got his devilish scars on his mouth. And that's to emphasize his theme as an agent of chaos, that his identity itself is a mystery and is unknowable, and kind of using that as an example that they're probably already familiar with. But then we moved on to the Cask of Amontillado, a very famous story, and having to grapple with Montresor, this man who commits a grotesque act of revenge. But there are a lot of reliability issues in the story that we get from him. So, this is great because they have to analyze not only what they're told, but what they're not told. What's missing? Why don't we know what these 1,000 injuries were? What was that insult that triggered, this grotesque revenge? And they have to infer not just things about the narrator, but things about the audience. Because the story is implied to be directed to a very specific someone who knows so well the nature of the narrator's soul. And as we assess it and we dig deeper into the story, we begin to realize that your answer to that question kind of fundamentally changes how you understand it. As well as some more traditional interpretive exercises like, do we think he feels guilt? Is he truly happy with this revenge? And of course, the ultimate question of, did Fortunato, deserve what happened to him? As well as, what do we do with a guy whose family motto is literally, you will not punish me with impunity? These are a family that revenge is clearly in their DNA. What do we do with someone who takes it that seriously? And of course, level 3 is the chimera. It's starting to get much more amorphous and difficult to deal with. Consistency and reliability is getting very scarce at this level. And of course, we do that with the yellow wallpaper, real nightmare fuel. And in the yellow wallpaper, they have to start really analyzing multiple streams of interpretation. They have to combine their knowledge of present psychology with the historical context of the time. Looking at what we know today about the trauma of isolation, the rescuer that was, a part of gendered science and medicine in the late 19th, early 20th century, inflicted on women because they were seen as fundamentally fragile and different. Reconciling interpretations of insanity and the supernatural. Is this a delusion, or is this something real but fantastic? And this is an interesting thing that they had fun with, is understand the difference between fiction, lying, and delusion. Because many times, especially with today's unreliable narrators, you're often getting lied to, but that person doesn't even intend to be lying because they're passing it on as truth. And that really changes the context when they're unreliable, but they might not even know that they're unreliable. And what do you do with that? And of course, ascertaining the nature of the setting through context clues alone. Why are there rings in the walls? Why are there bars on the window? What are the scratches on the floor? Were they moving furniture, or was someone trapped here? Multiple interpretations that fundamentally change how they understand the story. And they're mostly denied clarity to that. But of course, it gets even worse. And at level 4, I call the mirror maze. And the mirror maze, really denies any safe footing. And we do that with the famous Japanese story, In a Grove. You may be more familiar with it by its film adaptation, Rashomon, by Akira Kurosawa in the 1950s. This is a story of multiple testimonies of a murder of a samurai, but every single one of the testimonies conflicts the others in some fashion. So you're denied a concrete interpretation. And what do you do with that? How they learn to really reconcile or not reconcile multiple points of view. And this was so impactful that psychologists actually have a name for this, and they call it the Rashomon effect. That you could have 10 people looking at the same thing and the same physical event, and they'll give you 10 different versions. And how do you reconcile what that looks like? As well as identifying different motives for lying. Why would 4 people all admit to the same murder? And this is really an exercise in empathy, is understanding why someone is doing something. And as well, how do you interpret a story that purposely denies you clarity? This story is usually seen as kind of one of the first modernist moments of trying to completely undermine the idea of an objective truth. And students find that very uncomfortable in a good way. And to nerd out as a lit nerd for 1 second, I also really like this because John Keats, the English poet, had this idea of negative capability. And what he was talking about is, okay, what makes a great artist great? Capital G great. And as a good Englishman, he was thinking of Shakespeare. And in this letter to his brother, he defines it as, I mean negative capability. That is, when a man is capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason. He's being a very good romantic there and living up to the stereotype. But I really like that idea of, there is something very important and intellectually, sound to be able to dive into those gray areas where you don't have a clear answer. The question is not just a lockbox that you open and there it is. That some of the best art forces you to be uncomfortable and sit in those uncertainties. And I like how these unreliable narrators do that for the students. And this is feedback from one of the students, and he kind of seemed to recognize that. And he said, writing is not black and white. There's not just one interpretation that's the right one. And I thought that was definitely a successful moment. But let's talk about games. Let's talk about Her Story. So the boss fight, the final level, was this game, Her Story. And as the tagline says, it's a video game about a woman talking to the police. And to give you a taste, let's meet Hannah.
And all these stories we've been telling each other, just that, stories.
So this is who they grapple with. This is our unreliable narrator. The whole game is essentially digging through archives of this interview with Hannah and trying to piece together this narrative of not only what happens, but also your identity. There's a face that sometimes gets reflected in the false screen in the game, is a question that you have to figure out as well as who are you and why are you digging into the story. So here's how the game looks like for most of the gameplay. As you can see here, you have kind of an old 90s style computer screen, because this computer that you're on is in a basement in rural England, and it's been covered in dust and untouched for several years. You can hear the clicking of the hard drive as you search for things, probably all 30 megabytes of it, and you can search for terms, and as you search for terms like murder, clips will pop up, because all of the clips have been hard-coded with transcripts for you to be able to search, by word or phrase. And for example, murder pops up, and you can see some of the results there. And the little eye icon also lets you know at a glance if you've seen that clip before. But you can also save important clips in that clipboard at the bottom. You can tag clips and add your own notes to make it easier to search again, so you don't have to remember, okay, what word did I put in that made that pop up? And as well, on the right there, for kind of the completionist, you can bring up this window that visually shows you, okay, what percentage of the clips have you unlocked? If you really want to get to 100%, you'll be able to tell at a glance. So you might think, okay, well, let's just put in the word "the," and we'll get all of them. Well, the game makes that a little harder because you only get 5 clips at a time. So you really have to start thinking carefully and kind of going down the rabbit hole of certain search terms. Like, okay, they mentioned a Brian. Who's Brian? Let's plug in Brian and see what pops up. Wait, what was that about, a mirror? Following these different narrative threads. And what's cool about that also, it means every story is going to unfold differently, because there's no set linear narrative, because all of these clips have been fragmented. They're completely out of order. Some of them might be 4 seconds long, some of them might be 55 seconds long, and they're completely out of chronological order. So one of the things you have to do is begin to assess and reconstruct this narrative as you dig through. So for example, if you were trying to find this clip, putting in "I" is probably not going to get you anything, maybe just by blind luck. Felt, maybe, possibly. Guilty is probably a more specific word, and certainly kiss is going to be probably more of a rare hit. And certainly after the kiss, or guilty and kiss, could definitely land you on this clip. So that's the kind of searching and thinking about the narrative that you have to do. You have to kind of think ahead of, okay, where might this story be going, and what search terms could specifically get me those clips. So this is how my students played it in a hot seat model, where they had one student volunteer usually every class. We played this around 5 days. And one student would be in control and putting in the search terms, and the other students would be, firing out theories and suggesting terms to look for. And as you can see, they have their narrator tables open and they're writing notes as they go. And again, going back to the 21st century skills, this is multiple streams of information that they are having to assess on the fly here. Not only are they having to compile what this narrative looks like as they go through the clip and understanding how it goes, they also have this chronological level, because Hannah saying one thing early on in the interview process is going to be completely different if that date and time shows to be much later in the process. And there's the timestamp up in the corner of every video. So they are basically having to do multiple levels of interpretation on the fly as every clip is played. And of course, they can replay clips that they think are important and write down the ideas to look at later. But this is multiple streams that they are assessing right as they go and play the game. And also, they're playing it as a group, which is something I'm going to come back to a little bit later. So this is him working on the narrator table. So this is what a completed narrator table looked like for her story. The student has, a timeline, summary of facts, specific evidence, quotes, timestamps, all just so they can just understand the narrative. And I didn't put any requirement other than you have to fill out the narrator table. So I'm going to grade it for effort and completion. And all of the students just filled pages and pages of notes. And this student, it was good for me to see, because he was definitely what I would describe as a struggling mechanical writer. And he had been making progress throughout the year and getting more confident putting words on the page because he had a really good English teacher. But I was really worried that this might be a bit of a curveball at the last second. With this new way of having to engage in a text, is it going to throw him? And it definitely didn't. And like I said, he filled the pages of his notes as he went. And this is another story, or no, another student. This is just their notes. This is just him mentally collecting his thoughts. This is not even the graded writing we're at yet. And they are writing, paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs just to understand what's in front of them. They don't do that for the Scarlet Letter. They go to Schmoop. But they're putting in so much effort and exercise just to grapple with the text. So going back to them playing as a group. So they all reported that they really liked this style for the game. And that's encouraging for a couple of reasons. One is I work in a one-to-one laptop school, and other texts I've used, like Gone Home, I've done one-to-one. And sometimes that can be a barrier in many classrooms. But this was an example of how the hot seat method of just having one laptop be the center of the gameplay not only was acceptable, it was probably preferable, and it was probably the optimal way for it to be played. They said that the class was a lot more vibrant. They were enthusiastic while they were playing this. Some of their fondest memories were playing it together and they discover a new piece of information and the whole class would freak out. So this kind of group social playing experience was really powerful for them. And this was from a review that one of them ended up writing for their final assignment. And he reported the same things, that it was much less frustrating. When he would get stuck, someone else would figure out and come up with a new twist. It was an overall much more enjoyable game when they played it together. So I'm going to give you some very persuasive numbers now, because what's cool about this is that the research backs it up. So this is from a 2011 study, and it says the results on knowledge and cognitive skills, serious games are more effective than training with conventional instruction methods. So we're at the point now that you don't need to fight the fight. Games have been statistically proven to be many times better for learning than traditional methods. How much better? 20% higher on self-efficacy, 11% higher declarative knowledge, 14% higher procedural knowledge, retention 9% higher. And this gets even better, because a study that followed up on this one found, and they weren't intending this, found that serious games are even more effective when played in groups. Even more effective. How effective? I'm an English teacher, so I don't understand how a Z-score works, but 2.34 is apparently quite a bit. So it's a significant value added when you're playing serious games, and even better when they're in a group. So I want to talk about choice for a second, because I think this is a really important element, both of game-based learning and learning in general. So this is the 19th century German classroom. And the 19th century Germans were the ones who basically created the model that we would think of as traditional education. Seats, rows, looking up at a single source of information, replicating it directly from teacher to student. All standardized. And this was really good, because the reason it got popular is because it worked. It worked for what society needed at the time. Because at this time, all cognitive skills were being done by humans. So if you were in the Dutch East India Company and you just entered into a new market in the Caribbean and you needed a new accountant, you needed to know that the accountant you got from London was going to be trained the same way you were, and the same way your last accountant was, and the same way that your accountant in North Carolina is. Humans needed to be swappable parts. We don't need that anymore. We all have computers. That's why it's a dead model, because it's not meeting our needs anymore. And I'm sorry, if you put a smart board in the front of the classroom and you do the same thing, it's a new coat of paint on the same crappy car. We need to be giving students choice. And both of these models, they don't have a choice. It's look, sit down, listen. So even further, though, looking at reading specifically, Constance Steinkuhler, who's kind of one of the academic mavens of game-based learning research, she did some studies about reading gains in literacy, and she found that when struggling readers were allowed to choose the topic, They performed basically at perfect comprehension level, even on texts that were 7 to 8 grade levels above their head. 7 to 8 grade levels. Struggling readers. And sorry for the picture of a picture, but academics are very good at producing research and then making it completely inaccessible to anyone. So just had to use this from the Games for Change conference earlier this week. But you probably can't see it, but that's a similar study that found that when you give students choice and they're allowed to read texts that they are personally invested in this case it was, I think, articles and writing about Minecraft, the difference between a struggling reader and their comprehension and a non-struggling reader disappeared. No statistical difference. Let me say that again. It disappeared. There's no difference anymore. That's black magic. That's witchcraft. We can't ignore that. We need to be giving students more choice because it works. Oh, you can clap. Go for it. So to not be a hypocrite, here's how I put some choice into this unit. So they had a choice between 2 different types of final assignments that they wanted to work on. They could be an investigative reporter or they could be a reviewer. And an investigative reporter is for people who really wanted to dig into the nitty-gritty of this messy narrative. And the reviewers for something who wanted to kind of more look at it from like a critical point of view, as a game and playing a narrative experience. So equal length. I didn't want someone just trying to take the path of least resistance. And for both of them, they had to independently, and with my help, assess an example text to model some of their writing after. And the investigative reporter read a cold case article from Vanity Fair, which was actually a great example to find because much of what it refers to in the cold case narrative are recordings of a police interview with a suspect. So it was a very helpful example text of how they could model it. They had to include evidence, screenshots and quotes, had to have a narrative hook because this type of writing is quasi-creative, quasi-persuasive. There's a lot going on here. And then, take this timeline and this narrative, this completely fragmented mess, and have it make sense for someone who hasn't played the game. So this is a great deal of thinking about your audience and empathy of, okay, I need to explain this to someone who has no idea, someone who has no idea what this game is like, and have this story make sense. Recreate moments with sensory details. Find those important moments and make the reader relive them. And of course, transitions are really important, especially with a non-linear narrative, and a conclusion that ties everything back together. And this is an example of one of the investigative reports. And this student reported they loved doing this because they were constantly at war with themselves about what the true story was. But they had to find the interpretation that they could tell the story of and then stick to it, but knowing deep down that there was no objective truth here, but they still had to have it make sense. And again, he said it was a blast and that he had fun writing up this final report. I don't think they've ever said this about the 5-paragraph essays that I inflict on them. I still like the 5-paragraph essay. I think it's relevant in many ways, but they certainly don't call them fun. So reviews and criticism have become really fundamental to the 21st century, media experience. I have friends who, if a movie doesn't get certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, might as well not exist. Amazon is essentially a commercial behemoth based on reviews. I don't think anyone would buy something on Amazon that has a 1-star review. And if it has a 5-star review, most people are going to click the button and just buy it. The Wirecutter was a great site. My water bottle I bought because they said it was the best glass one, and they do all kinds of great reviews. And Metacritic, if you haven't heard of it, is a review aggregator, mostly for movies and video games. And it's become so fundamental that game developers have their salaries and bonuses sometimes tied to the Metacritic score that their game gets upon release. So they were literally freaking out about getting an 81 versus an 82, or an 83 versus an 84, because their livelihood might be at stake based on these reviews. So speaking of the reviews, one thing they had to look at was what's the difference between commentary and recommendation, because they're 2 different things. And a review is not just saying that something's good or bad. Those are useless terms. And we talked a lot about John Updike's rule number 1 for criticism, which is you can't fault an artist for failing to do something that they weren't even trying to attempt. As I tell them, you can't say you don't like Call of Duty because it has too much guns. You can't say you don't like Grand Theft Auto because there's too much driving. You have to really understand what the thesis of the game was, and that's a pretty fundamental interpretive exercise. And they also had to understand their audience. Who is going to be reading this review, and how can I be of service to them? As well as specific examples, basic English, identifying themes and connections to the larger world, as well as then making a recommendation to a specific audience. Who is going to appreciate this game? Who is not going to appreciate this game? Again, more exercises in empathy and understanding someone else's perspective based on your opinion. But you don't have to take my word for it. You could take Arthur Gies, the reviews editor at Polygon's word for it, because I contacted him and asked him, I was like, hey, help me teach my kids good game reviews. What does a good game review look like at the professional level? And here's what he said. Our basic structure is the 5-part argumentative thesis-based essay with an avoidance of passive voice. Wait, what did he say? The 5-part argumentative thesis-based essay? I win. Oh, yeah, 5-paragraph essays, they're useless, Mr. Fallon. I don't think so. And he goes on to say avoidance of passive voice. And I really like how he phrased this, assuming responsibility for one's own thought and opinion. And I think on the internet, that's particularly true, where we have people, especially if it's anonymous, just sling their opinions around without any ownership of those ideas. And just throwing an opinion around with no evidence, no coherent thought, no coherent argument structure. And I really like how he says, the review has to embrace that fundamentally. You can't just say a game stinks. You have to be able to give a coherent reason and examples and argument why. And avoiding clicheing, focusing on transitions. This is English 101. And this is what's being done at the professional level in a medium that the students are often fundamentally engaged in. And again, he says the thesis-based essay works for just about everything. So again, I win. And their reviews, I think, brought up some really interesting points. This game is disorganized on purpose. Showing real understanding of why something is structured the way it is. It is difficult, baffling, but in the end, a very fun game to play. I don't think that they would describe something as difficult and baffling and fun on anything else except for a game. Most students are not going to find a traditional, instruction method that they find difficult and baffling. The next word out of their mouth is not going to be fun. But for a game, it is. So back to these 21st century skills. And one of the reasons I got attached to this, other than I think it's a really good big picture overview of what we can be doing for our students, is that I found with game-based learning, it naturally checks these boxes. There's, I think, a real connection here. And it's like games are becoming, and already are probably, the dominant medium of the 21st century. And that's why they fit these 21st century skills, because it's directly correlated with the world that we're living in and how we're expressing ourselves. All of these are being hit. Ethical responsibilities, maybe, but whatever. I have the clicker. I can do whatever I want. So what's next? So, I have a blog, The Alternate Classroom. I'll be putting up some more posts both about this unit, if you want to dig a little bit deeper, as well as some of the other units I've done, and great resources and people that you should take a look at. But I'll throw out a few kind of just starting points for some of the teachers out there. So, STEM teachers. You guys read this book? Did you guys read this book? See this movie? Yeah. I don't know if you remember, but let me just read this quick excerpt out of it. Step 1 is to collect the CO2 and store it in a high-pressure vessel. Once I get the fuel plant hooked up to the Habs power, it'll give me half a liter of liquid CO2 per hour indefinitely. After 10 sols, it'll have made 125 liters of CO2, which will make it 125 liters of O2 after I feed it to the oxygenator. That's enough to make 250 liters of water, so I have a plant for oxygen. That's a word problem. This novel that every kid was reading is a giant word problem. Strand your students on Mars. They will thank you for it. You know, and there are great board games. This is a brand new one called First Martians, which is essentially just The Martian, the board game. You know, adapt it, mod it. History teachers. All right, you have no excuse, history teachers. There's so many history games out there. I could go on all day just coming up with examples. Here's an easy one. Civ 6, probably heard about it. Probably maybe seen some teachers who are using it. Guess what? It's going to get even easier. There's an EDU edition coming out this year, designed to put this directly into the classrooms like they did for Minecraft. No excuse. Foreign language teachers. Well, step one would just be to go find Glenn Irvin and ask him what he does with Spanish and Minecraft, because it's already been done. But here's an idea. Take a how to play YouTube video or our YouTube video review and have them do it in French. Have them do it in Spanish. Take their favorite game and teach me how to play it in Spanish. Do it as a video. And here's something that really I found kind of striking that a student reported when they were giving me feedback on this unit. And he said it was really cool how the dread and stress that were part of normal exams were replaced by excitement and joy. Dread and stress. Those are the words that he used to describe traditional learning and assessment. Dread and stress, excitement and joy. I know which one I'm going to bet on 10 times out of 10. So, kind of a parting thought here. I found this on my desk last day of school as I was cleaning up to go home. It's actually a reference to an alternate reality game that I played with this class earlier in the year. And also, it's in a mason jar because I drink my coffee out of a mason jar because I'm a hipster doofus. Also, I just lose the really expensive thermoses. And inside, he wrote a letter. And it was very sweet, and he was thanking me for being a teacher for 7th and 9th grade and how much fun he had. But he also said this: I used to be ashamed of my nerdy interests, but you have instilled in me a newfound self-confidence that has made a tremendous difference in my life. I'll definitely take credit for that, but a bigger part of it was it was the game-based learning. It was meeting him where he is. It was saying the way you see the world and the way you want to interact with the world is not only acceptable, it's cool, and it's a part of life. And if we look at a lot of the education that we have built, we don't do that at all. And my parting thought here would be that, games are a learning style. The same way that we would try to reach different learning styles of different types of students and differentiate our classroom, you have to include games in that formula. You have to. So thank you for listening to me this morning. I strongly recommend, these are just a few of the people that I know are here who are nerds that would love to talk to you. There's many, many more that are here, and many more that aren't here. Find them, ambush them in the hallway, stalk them on Twitter, email them, visit their school, join the tribe. The tribe started here. This is why it impacted me so greatly. So, come join, ask questions, get nerdy. Let's have our students be able to get more excitement and joy in their learning. Thank you. All right, who's sitting in, what is this, a column? Column 8, row 7. Is anyone in that seat? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yes, you win. You win a copy of her story. Congratulations. All right, Matt, do you have anything to say? because I'm done.
Thanks, John. I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out again today. I also wanted to let you know, we just got the bags for everyone, so they'll be in the arcade. If you guys stop by, you can pick up your bag anytime today. And then if you have any questions with professional development, again, just let us know. Stop by the help desk and make sure to sign up there if you didn't already sign up for My Learning Plan. If you have trouble, just let us know. Stop by the help desk, and we will help you out. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Yes, I mean, some games I think don't work for hours, but that game was definitely.
I guess, yeah. Glad to have yours.
Yeah, well, I'll try to bring it up on the Wi-Fi, otherwise I'll grab your flash because it's not on, so. Yep. Yeah, don't go twice. Okay. So here's the thing. This is like taped to this side, but Mac inputs over here. I'm just talking to myself about tech stuff.
Cool, you got it.
Well, let's see.
Now we just need it.
Oh, good. Yes, because I just plugged it in and it didn't actually. Do I need to do mirror display or? Oh, okay. I'm okay. I'm gonna grab some water from back there. No, I think we'll be okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Water would be good though, actually. If, okay. That'd be great. Yeah. Yeah. Just. Okay, thank you.
Sounds great. That'd be great. Thanks. 'Cause we can talk.
Well, yeah, I just don't know how to. It's just showing like the background of my screen.
it takes a second for the RF.
Okay. Okay, so test. Okay, good. Okay, everybody, we'll get started. Okay. All right. Hi, welcome to our presentation, Not Child's Play, Transformative Learning Through Gaming for Adult Learners, with case studies in a history course and a nutrition course. I'm Anna Zendel, and this is my colleague, Mary Berkery. Okay, so we're from Excelsior College, which is an online nonprofit college serving non-traditional adult learners. The average age of our student is between 38 and 40, so a little bit older. We have a very high military presence as well. Our courses are primarily, because of our student population, our courses tend to be 8-week intensive courses. So that's a little bit about our college, just so you know a little bit of the context for how we decided to embark into gaming with our courses. So a little bit of background. So at Excelsior, we were looking for new and innovative ways to reach our student population. We really wanted to maximize engagement in our courses, knowing that we only had students for about 8 weeks in each course, and we wanted to get the most out of it, and for them to get the most out of the materials as well. So we had some in-house interest in gamifying courses, and through that, we were able to launch a game-based learning pilot where we each took courses for each of our 5 schools and designed games, and Mary and I are going to talk about our 2 courses. So what we did was we collaborated with a company, a vendor, Muzzy Lane, which is a game-based learning vendor with a really great expertise in working with non-traditional adult learners, and also very strong learning and teaching theory background. So that was very helpful. And our two games used a tool called Author, which we'll talk a little bit about as we go through our games. So what we're going to do is we're going to share our games and lessons learned as a result of developing these games. And I will say that we're pretty new to gaming, so a lot of these lessons will be sort of newbie lessons. So first we look to the literature. So, and the literature specific to what we could draw for non-traditional adult learners. So there's a pretty broad literature around gaming. Some of the points that we thought were really important for our students were we really wanted a safe place for students to develop their critical thinking skills, to apply that content to real-life situations, and in particular taking their vast experiences and being able to apply those as well as the course materials to their learning. We wanted to build critical thinking, we wanted to really build decision-making skills as well. And we also wanted to look at social attitudes and shifting those as well. For both of our courses, students would come in with assumptions, and we really wanted to challenge those assumptions in meaningful ways. So we also really wanted to help students to transform their knowledge to understanding, and then also to action, which is important. For our students, for our adult learners, we wanted to be very transparent about the purpose and the relevance of the games as well, which is throughout the literature. That's a little bit about that. So why did we choose nutrition? Our nutrition course has been around for about a decade, and it's a solid course. We always use the latest, greatest evidence base in nutrition. What we saw as an emerging theme, though, was that our students came in with assumptions about what proper nutrition was and how their clientele, their future clientele, should make choices around nutrition. And we really want to kind of challenge those attitudes that they came in with, particularly where poverty was a factor. Sometimes students felt that people should make certain decisions, when in reality the environment, finances, they just didn't lend themselves to those decisions. So we wanted to introduce some new opportunities to build on the affective learning domain. So, I'm sorry, I'm a little nervous talking in front of a mic. This is my first time ever, so little nervous about that. But okay, so we wanted to, in particular, we saw with a certain subset of our students that there was kind of a there was more of a directive attitude towards helping people change their nutritional behaviors. So we wanted to build on empathy and also on collaborative problem solving and really partnering. So we saw games as a way to do that. So what we did was we designed 2 games. Remember, these are 8-week courses. So in week 3, we designed a game that introduced students to the DASH diet, which is dietary approaches to stop hypertension. So what they did was they went on a trip to a supermarket, and I'll actually walk you through a supermarket trip in a moment, and they picked convenient foods that targeted eating for the DASH diet plan. So students grappled with, what is a low-sodium diet? How do I do this diet with just convenient foods, which is what a lot of Americans tend to do? And then what are the consequences of those choices? So when people eat with a DASH diet, particularly when they're eating convenience foods, they're often inadvertently sacrificing fiber and protein as well. So as they made their decisions, they kind of learned some of the consequences and then were able to make different decisions. So then fast forward to week 7, where we created a scaffolded game where students took another trip to a full supermarket, and there they needed to purchase food with some constraints in place. So they needed to feed a family of 4. And this was a 4-person family where there was no transportation, so this is a family on a fixed income, a very fixed income. And here you see, we designed this using the author game, the author tool. And so you see here, these are the screens that the students are going through as the introduction. And there's actually over in the corner here, we have links to our games that you can play a little bit later on as well. So students are introduced to Feed a Family of 4, and they have no transportation, so they need to carry their food with them. They also have only $25 to purchase food for 4 days, and they don't have credit card or public assistance, so that's really what they have. The family consists of themselves, their spouse, a teenage son, and then a mom who's also moved in with them. And there are a number of health conditions that tend to be fairly common for people who are living in strict financial circumstances. So they walk through these games, through these screens, and introduced to all of the constraints. And so in addition, some of the health conditions that they've been exposed to over the course that they've learned about are around hypertension, which they were introduced to in the 3rd week. Then they're also looking at diabetes as another chronic condition that's very common throughout America. It's really pandemic. They also have to deal with the mom who's moved in with them recently has dentures, and there's no money for the no dental insurance, so the dentures need to be adjusted, and there's just not money to do that. So the challenge that the students face, the food that they purchase, it has to be portable. They need to be able to carry it. It needs to be affordable. It needs to be easy to prep because the teenage son is doing a lot of the food prep work while your client is working long hours. You want the food to be filling, people to be satisfied. It needs to be low sodium for the hypertension, low sugar for the diabetes, easy to chew for the mom, and then you really want it to taste good. That's just a human need, to have food that's satisfying, that really sates. So the students go down the aisle. So they go down a series of 6 aisles. So we kept it pretty simple and streamlined. A lot of that is because we were relatively new to programming and games. So you'll see that each of the aisles has 4 selections. Students can choose one of the 4. For each of the selections, we needed to program in all the nutritional values. So we need to go research them, program them in, and then we needed to create prompts for each of the selections. The students would get some automated feedback for whatever they chose. So we start with the dairy, where they have a choice of yogurt, milk, eggs, and cheese. And you also see at the top that there are two little cells, and that gives students a running tally of the things that are the most important to the client, to the hypothetical client, which would be, how much am I spending? How many servings am I getting? Am I getting enough food? So then they go down to the grains aisle, and there they have a choice of cereal, bread, pasta, or rice pilaf. And here you see an example of they've made their selection, they've chosen the pasta, and their feedback that they're receiving is, yes, this is really economical. It will give you a lot of servings, but it's also high carb, so you want to be careful of your portion sizes. And if they had chosen the rice pilaf, they would have gotten a prompt around sodium as well. So then they move to the meats aisle, and they have 4 choices, which are on the surface, they're pretty good choices, but there's always this tension that the students are choosing for a variety of health conditions, and there are inner conflicts to whatever they choose. So here the student chose the turkey, and so this is very convenient. The son can very easily make the turkey sandwiches, particularly if he chose the bread in the grains aisle. But turkey tends to be very high in sodium unless you choose the low sodium. And then if they were to choose the chicken or the beef, there are the issues with food prep and how easy it would be for a teenage son. And we don't share how old the teenage son is, but if it were a younger teenager, it could be really difficult, maybe even dangerous. Then they move to the produce aisle. They have a series of choices with the feedback that was also programmed in. And then the cost and the servings is also accumulating for the students, so they always know where they stand. They move to the canned goods aisle, where, again, they have a series of seemingly really good choices, particularly for living on a budget. They have canned veggies, beans, peanut butter, and fruit. And there are some caveats with that. So in this case, the student chose the peanut butter, which is high in sodium and fat. But it's also a good energy. It's easy to prep, so there's a good rationale for choosing that. Then they move to the frozen goods, where they're choosing between frozen meat, frozen lasagna, corn, and strawberries. And here, too, you start to get a sense of, as the students are choosing, they're building a meal plan as well. So we've got all these disparate products. How are we going to make a meal with it? So those are the 6 aisles. So then they get their feedback. And the author tool provides very nice, succinct feedback for the students, and it's very easy for the faculty to program it in as well. So they get their cost score with a little bit of feedback, their servings, and then we choose 4 other, there are 4 other categories that are pulled depending on what the student has chosen. That talks about things like fat, cholesterol, sodium, ease of chewing, some of the intergenerational issues around food choices, particularly for older adults, and also for growing teenagers. So we saw some real opportunities with the nutrition course to help students to make decisions that were really based on logistics, on the built environment, where their clients were living or where they're living as well, because a lot of people were doing this based on their own lives, trying to figure out how to make better decisions. So they make decisions around food sufficiency, nutritional value. Menu planning is a big feature of this, and a lot of our students, they're a bit older, but a lot of our students don't have a great grasp of menu planning, so they learn a lot about that in the class. Also, and at the core of what we wanted to accomplish was they get to tackle some of those implicit assumptions that they came to the course with, and decide how accurate they are and for whom. And then they also have this opportunity as emerging professionals to look at meeting the family's needs, partnering rather than kind of directing the process, and other decision opportunities. So they can play the game as often as they want, which is really great. Most of our students play it between 3 and 4 times, but we've had some students who play it as often as 15 to 20 times, trying to find the right answer, which the way that this game is, there really is no right answer. But it's really interesting for them to do. And also, interestingly, a number of our students have really taken this particular game to heart in that they're actually going out and trying to purchase food for their own families on $25 and trying it out in real life. So how do we integrate these games? We weren't looking to gamify the entire course, but rather to strategically add gaming situation for the students. So what we did was we have asynchronous online discussions every week that are required. So we built the games into the discussion. So they needed to do the games and then talk about their experiences and talk about what shifted for them over the week as they tried the game. We also developed essays for them so they could write about their experiences. They're very reflective and kind of journal-like, a safe place for them to kind of grapple with those myths and assumptions and how things changed for them without having to do it in the public forum. And then they also, in this particular course, they design newsletters that they can disseminate to a population of interest. So they had opportunities to integrate what they learned from the games into those as well, and many did. So that's a little bit about the nutrition course, and now Mary will talk about the gaming course, the history course.
All right, thanks, Anna. Slightly taller than you. Okay, so unlike Anna's class, I decided to integrate gaming into a brand new course on World War I. So it doesn't offer that kind of before and after comparison of what was the class like before the game so that we can measure the changes in withdrawal rates or in student engagement or grades. But on the other hand, it did allow us to create the syllabus and the classroom discussions and the assignments knowing where the gaming elements were going to be and kind of working around those. So I knew going into this project that I wanted to emphasize some particular skills in history that are difficult to teach through kind of passive methods of learning, which we traditionally use at the secondary or post-secondary level, primary and secondary source reading, for example. So there were particular skills and particular concepts that are emphasized in my curriculum and emphasized in history program outcomes. Anybody out here also a history teacher or social studies? Okay, one person. Okay, so the first of these is the idea of historical empathy, and that's the idea that we judge the past based on a past lens and not through our present day mindset. So that's to say that take the example of witches, for example. Today we might say accusing somebody of witchcraft is just kind of silly or funny, but that doesn't actually benefit us in any way. It doesn't help us understand why in colonial New England people were accused of witchcraft. What's more beneficial is to take the perspective of the past and think about gender roles and religion and power and what that can tell us about why people were accused of witchcraft. So when I say empathy, I don't mean that we don't criticize the past, because we certainly do, and we can criticize past actions, but we don't do it from our 21st century lens. So having students actually take the perspective of someone in the past, I think, allows for the historical empathy a lot better than just simply reading about the past. The second concept is the idea of contingency, and this is one that historians always use. And this is the idea that the past didn't necessarily have to happen as it did. Everything is a product of context. So I think this is a particularly hard skill to teach to some of my students who tend to be kind of history buffs. Like Anna said, our students are adult learners, sometimes in their late 30s or 40s, and they're going into these courses thinking that they know everything about a particular moment because they've seen the documentaries and they've read, novels about it, watch TV shows. And that kind of gives history sometimes this feeling of having a plot that's unfolding that's already written in stone, when of course that wasn't the case, right? So we didn't know that the colonists were going to win the American Revolution. And what's more important is that the colonists didn't know they were going to win the American Revolution, right? So we can't write our own hindsight back on them as their foresight. And so I think being able to play a game in history allows us to understand the importance of context and understand the way that things could have changed depending on very different or even slightly different circumstances. The third concept is agency, and that has come up a lot in this conference already. And that's the idea that you as an individual actor have the ability to influence the things around you. And so playing as an individual in a game gives you a sense of being able to change circumstances. But what's important in these games that I wanted to emphasize is that you're not the only individual actor. They are single-player games, so you are the only actor in that sense. But there are other people that you're having conversations with in these games, and they have their own agendas too, and they are trying to influence you, and they're trying to influence the circumstances in ways that you might not like. So you may be pushing for peace, for example, but other foreign diplomats, other foreign leaders are not necessarily going to have that same agenda. So everyone has agency, right? Some more than others, but that's something that's really crucial to hone in on here. And finally, I really wanted to make sure that the games were not about winning. There's no final score that you get in at the end, just like Anna's game. Students get a minor participation score just for completing the game in the week that it's assigned, but really they're getting graded on the games through their discussions afterward, that they get the chance to digest and unpack the games and talk to their peers about the different outcomes that they got. It's not necessarily that you had to push in a certain direction and you had to get a certain outcome, so it's not scored in that sense. So I'll just run you through. There's 3 games in the course, and they start out with the first one here, right the first week that you get into the class, where you play as the Kaiser of Germany at the onset of World War I. If you know anything about World War I, this is right after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, what became known later as the July Crisis. So this moment where things are kind of in flux, we don't know which direction they're going to go. Leaning toward war, but there are still a lot of things up in the air about how that war is going to unfold. So we don't tell students ahead of time that they have to play in any particular way, and I think that actually frustrates them a little bit, which is good. That they say, tell me how you want me to play. Do you want me to play as the Kaiser and eventually end up in a two-front war? Do you want me to play to avoid war? And we don't give any kind of directions like that, so that students end up playing it multiple times and taking multiple perspectives. So the first time they might play, as peacefully as possible, and the next time they might try to play as the Kaiser, the next time they might try to play more aggressively. And I think that yields more interesting results than trying to get them to pursue a particular avenue. So what they find out is that not only is there no way to necessarily win the game, but not all outcomes, and really in this game, actually no outcomes are favorable. So you may push for peace, but context is still really key here, right? So a lot has already happened. You may be pushing for peace, but consider your military advisors. This is not a situation where you're the only one in control here. So you might get this kind of feedback at the end telling you, watch your back, your advisors are furious, and you end up having to abdicate your throne. So in real life, the Kaiser abdicates his throne over the course of World War I. What the students don't know is that there's about 6 possible outcomes at the end of this game, and every single one of them, the Kaiser ends up abdicating his throne. You'll only discover that if you play the game quite a few times, and often they only discover that after they've gone into the discussions and they see how different students' games unfolded. Because not all of the outcomes are available to you depending on how you play. You play more peacefully, you get different kind of options at the end than somebody who's playing more aggressively or in kind of a wishy-washy manner. So the other really clever thing that's in this game is that you have the ability to give away too much information at an inopportune time. So the idea is that the students have done the reading ahead of time. They get a situation report at the very start of the game that tells them, situates you in time, this is where you are, this is the information that you have, but not everyone else has the same information as you. So in the course of these conversations, for example, with the foreign diplomat from England or with the Tsar of Russia, who happens to be your first cousin, and that's true, the Kaiser and the Tsar of Russia were first cousins, so their kind of telegrams back and forth have these oddly personal airs, and you might tend to trust him too much because you think he's family and he might be working with you. That's not necessarily the case, and you might kind of tip him off about things that he doesn't already know. And if anybody is a history buff out here, I know that this poster is actually an anachronism. That poster is from World War II, but it just seemed too perfect for the scenario to not put there. Okay, so in the second game, 2 weeks later, they play as an unnamed general of an unnamed nation on the Western Front. And we really thought it was important here to not give them more information than that because the circumstances on the Western Front were similar for everybody. So it doesn't really matter if you're a general of France or Germany or whatever. There were certain things that we wanted to emphasize about the Western Front that really did not depend on that information. So the idea here is that you are gathering information on the enemy and kind of softening them in advance of a big attack. And it's been, a winter of stalemate. Nothing has happened for a long time, so you as a general are under a lot of pressure to kind of break that stalemate. And, So what I wanted to highlight here was the juxtaposition of boredom and drudgery of the stalemated Western Front where nothing is happening for months on end with this feeling of intense anxiety, especially for a leader of the Western Front, to make something happen, to break that stalemate and get your boys home for Christmas or whatever it was. So the students face a hidden ticking clock in this game that they don't know about and they may only discover after they've played it 4 or 5 times. But if you take too long to gather information on your enemy, you're going to get recalled from your post, and you're going to get threatening messages like this one telling you, make an action soon, you're going to get recalled back to the homeland, which we don't say where that is. But this really gives them the sense that they'll never have all the information that they need to launch an attack, and they have to kind of make choices that they're not necessarily comfortable with. The other thing that we wanted to highlight in this game was that World War I has this really unique place in history as the intersection of 19th century tactics of war and 20th century tactics of war. So you have things like cavalry charges and bayonets mixed with new tanks and airplanes and tethered air balloons and flamethrowers. And all of those things come into play here, and what's important is that a lot of them don't work. And they need to know that, right? So not necessarily, the new is not always better than the old in this case. So flamethrowers were kind of a new invention. They did not work at all because you had to be like 10 feet away from your enemy to use it. which, if you know anything about trench warfare, is not the way things work. So they have the opportunity to kind of play through a lot of these different scenarios and see that, you know, a large majority of them don't work. And this is one of those games that students will play 12 or 13 or 14 times, especially our military students, to try to figure out how to win it. And again, there's some avenues that break the stalemate, but nothing is really a purely good scenario that ends in the result, of course, which we want to emphasize in a game about war. The other thing in this game that we have the students grapple with is that this class includes a general education outcome on ethics. So we ask the students to grapple with the question of whether to use poison gas as a weapon of war. And this is a key moment of historical empathy here, to think about, put yourself in the position of somebody who is a general during World War I, not yourself in the 21st century, knowing that today that's a war crime. Today, of course, we wouldn't use poison gas as a weapon of war. But consider the circumstances here. Do you use it if the enemy has already used it against you? Are you less likely to use it if you know there's a hospital behind their lines? Are you less likely to use it if you can see, as in this scenario, the wind blows back often and blows that gas right back on your own troops? It doesn't actually even work, and it may harm your own troops. So we have the students kind of play through the game, and then after in the discussions, this is one of the things that they grapple with each other. Did you choose to use poison gas as a weapon of war? Why or why not? And I think it tends to be the best discussion in the whole class, and it tends to be about 50-50 students who choose to use it or choose to not use it. And their ability to rationalize why they're using it or why they're not using it is really fascinating stuff. So as I mentioned, we reinforce the games through the course content, and here this is the discussion where they're talking about poison gas as a weapon of war. And this, I think, is actually just as important, or maybe even more important than the game itself, is the ability to adjust it and discuss it with your peers in a lot more engaging way than, read this primary source and this article and, discuss it with your peers. And it really leads to more interesting discussions than we typically have in our courses. So the third game, 2 weeks later, is at the kind of chronological point when the U.S. enters the war. So the really interesting thing about this game is that there is only one outcome. You, as President Wilson, are going to ask Congress for a declaration of war. Too much has already happened when we think about the importance of context. The Zimmerman telegram has already happened. You're going to ask for a declaration of war. So what the object of the game here is that you need to get the public on your side. You need to be able to convince the public and convince Congress that war is the right thing to do here. So in that case, you need to talk to labor leaders to prevent strikes that are going to delay your ability to get munitions. You're going to talk to suffragist leaders about trying to get them on your side for the duration of the war so that you don't have that embarrassment of being the president who's fighting for democracy abroad while denying it at home. You're going to talk to a journalist, George Creel, about how to influence the public through the media, through propaganda, without denying the freedom of the press at home. And this is really a nod to the idea of consensus building in a democracy. So unlike Germany, the U.S. is a democracy here. We go to war as a group of people. At least that's, in theory, how it goes. So you, as president, you need to gather the support of your people, and you're going to have to do some things that are going to maybe piss the people off, like you're never going to get enough troops with an all-volunteer army. You're going to have to institute a draft. So if you don't institute a draft, you're going to deal with the ramifications of that. So after the games are played, this is the instructor's perspective. We use Blackboard, although we're switching to Canvas as our learning management system. And on the left, you can see, oh, that's really washed out. You can't really see it. But it gives you a sense of the student who played it, their score, if it did have a score. Again, my game's not scored, so it just says 100, and the amount of time that they played it. And over on the right, this is the administrator perspective that I can see, so that this game has run 7 or 8 times. The class has run 7 or 8 times by now. So I could see what's the average amount of time that students are taking to play it, how long are they playing for, if it was scored, what is the average score. And that's been really helpful for us. So the idea now is to collect results, both quantitative results that we're still waiting on. We did a kind of a pre-test, post-test survey with the courses that did exist beforehand. For mine, we chose a class that didn't have games but was similarly structured as an upper-level military history class. And we also are getting some feedback just kind of anecdotally from students in our discussions. We have an FAQ section where if they run into problems with their browser or whatever, they're able to post to that discussion, and then I add it to the FAQ for the next term. So there really has been very few headaches in terms of implementing the game and making sure that they go pretty well. And I'm going to skip past this. So tips for getting started at your institution. If you're thinking about going into the online gaming realm, working with Muzzy Lane Author or some kind of other authoring tool, you know, our 2 cents as kind of novices to this whole project. It doesn't have to be costly. When we worked with Muzzy Lane, they were just getting started with their authoring tool, and they've changed it now so that they have both institutional membership for an entire university to be a part of it, but also individual licenses to use the authoring tool, which I think are a lot less expensive. And of course, you know, you guys know much better than me that there are a lot of free authoring tools out there as well. Consider your audience. So this one was really important for us because, as Anna mentioned, we were working with adult learners. It was really important to us that we not be using kind of childish graphics and cartoons and kind of pandering to students who wouldn't find that kind of stuff enjoyable. So it had to be very serious games, and it had to be games that related to their life experiences. Consider tech limitations and ADA. This was important too because a majority of my students are military. They're often active duty military out on military bases. Their internet connections are not fast on these bases. So Muzzy Lane does make 3D authoring tools, and you can have these really cool graphics in your games. That wasn't going to work for us because if one student in the class can't play the game, it's not a valuable exercise, right? So these games might look slightly more bland than you could have, but it works for everybody. It works across platforms. It works on your phone and your tablet. And you know, in terms of ADA, it is screen readable, but we also have alternative assignments if there was an issue where a student couldn't access it. Involve your IT team from the start has been really important for us in terms of avoiding headaches on things that we don't know enough about. So, you know, LTI integration, we let somebody else handle, and how to sync it to the grade center and all that sort of stuff. Integrate with your course content and learning outcomes. So this is really crucial for us, that you design your learning outcomes first, and then you build your game, right? So that you're not building games and trying to squeeze it into the course material. You know what you want your students to come away from the course with, and how can the games best get us there. Keep it simple, short, and stop and go. This is another important thing for adult learners, is they are squeezing in their education in between, you know, family responsibilities, full-time work. Usually the majority of our students are working full-time or in the military full-time, and they can come and go from the games. You can actually put it down and come back, and the game picks up right where you left off, so you don't even have to finish it in one setting. But most of them are under 20 minutes long, so it is pretty easy to get through it. Give students space to digest and discuss. We talked about that a little bit. You know, if you just plop the game in there and don't give them time to discuss it, that's not going to be valuable. Allow students to experiment and play again. We talked about that. Have a plan to gather feedback and revise. So that's our plan now after the fall when we get our survey results, to worry about how can we revise the games, or how can we revise the course to better reflect the games, and have fun. And that's it. So any questions? And I should say, if you want to play through any of the games, you can type in these tiny URLs. It works on phones, although it's better if you tip it sideways. It works on tablets and computers. And Anna also printed out these URLs up at the front of the stage if you want to come grab it afterward. We're going to leave them open for the rest of the day if you want to check them out. Any questions? None? Okay. Well, thank you.
doing? Oh, thanks. I was gonna try to loosen up. I'm like, all right. Okay. There you go. All right. Thank you very much. All right. So on the computer it says 11 o'clock, so I'll start up the talk. Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Bill Strang. I am the owner of Make Steam. It's a consulting company for education. But today what I'm going to talk about is a Minecraft pilot program that we ran in 2 local districts. So first, a little bit about me. I'm a former math teacher. I taught middle school, high school. I'm also an engineer. I originally graduated from college as an industrial ceramic engineer. I did that for 12 years and then transitioned over into teaching. For Make Steam, we specialize in tying technology to curriculum, Minecraft, any version. You know, there's the EDU is very manageable, or Education Edition is very manageable. The Raspberry Pi, which is a small computer that you can do physical computing with. The Arduino is a microcontroller, and then programming with Scratch, Python, and Node-RED. All right. So we did the 2 pilot programs. We did one in Troy and one in Wynantskill. So first I'd like to just thank Mr. John Carmelo for the superintendent of Troy, and also Dr. Reardon in Wynantskill. So we did it just in the 4th grade classrooms. So there's 3 sections of 4th grade in Troy, 2 sections in Wynantskill. And basically we got, you know, they started off the year and we started doing lessons in Troy in January through June. And then Wynantskill, we started up in May. It was when they were able to get everything all together and up and running. So when we did this, I met with the teachers and talked about what they wanted me to cover with Minecraft. I sort of showed them Minecraft and that, and they said, you know, anything you can do just to practice addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and then perimeter and area, because it's something that they usually get to right before the state exam, and they don't have a lot of time to cover it. It's something that the kids have covered in grade 3, but just as a refresher. So Minecraft is, you know, because it's cubes. How many people are familiar with Minecraft? Just by raise your hands. Okay. So with the cubes in Minecraft, it makes it pretty easy to do perimeter and area. So why Minecraft? It's a virtual world. Again, with the cubes, it's digital manipulative. Kids are already playing the game, so it's a language they all have already, right? High engagement. When we first loaded them onto the computer, it was like a month before that we started doing the lessons. And every day the teachers were like, they're asking me, can we start Minecraft? Can we start Minecraft? So high engagement from the kids. And also it connects the abstract concepts of math, in particular, that we were focusing on, with concrete examples that we're able to do in the game. All right, so with Minecraft that we use, we had tower computers in Troy. So kids normally they play, there's a pocket edition where they do a touch screen and everything. With a tower computer, they had to use a keyboard and a mouse. So the first thing was just familiarizing themselves with the controls and how to move around in Minecraft with a mouse and a keyboard, which they picked up really quick. But in Wynantskill, they had a tablet, Microsoft Surface. So they were able to attach a keyboard and run it that way, but they could also pull the keyboard off with the tablet and do what they are familiar with the touch screen. So just 2 different hardware options that we did between Wynantskill and Troy. Some kids were not familiar. I'd say about 95% of all the kids were very familiar with Minecraft. There were kids that weren't familiar, but they picked it up pretty quickly. And then it was always, at the start of every lesson, it was reinforcing the rules of engagement, classroom rules. The rules that apply in our physical classroom world apply in a Minecraft world. You can't break anybody's stuff. You can't steal anybody's things. It happened. It's called griefing. The kids call it griefing when they somebody steals their stuff, or they destroy their house or something like that. And when it happens, it's not the worst thing. It's an opportunity to talk to kids about being a good digital citizen. you know, again, trying to create some empathy with the kids for the other classmates. But when you do this program, you got to expect it's going to happen where the kids are going to destroy somebody else's things. But it's an opportunity to reinforce what the classroom rules are. All right, so this is just a picture of the tutorial world that I made. So you can find a bunch online. Minecraft Education Edition also has a tutorial world. In Troy, I initially you can put up to 30 kids in one world. So with the Minecraft with the Minecraft Edition one, I put all 30 kids in there. And it's really only made for like one, so it was like there's some bottlenecking and things like that. So I put this one together where the kids, it has the instructions. So W goes forward, A goes left, D goes right, and S goes backwards. So they had to like get around the columns, and underneath the S was a door out. And when they went out the door, they were assigned a number, so they had to go to this particular area, and then they could it had them just like swim, they could like craft objects, they could take trees down, all things that they were doing in their Pocket Edition, but again, they're using a keyboard and mouse, so just to get them familiar. So this is basically the basic design of the community that we built in Minecraft. We'd have 24 plots of land with School 18 in the middle for the Troy group and a Gardner Dickerson school in the middle of all the properties, which I'll show for wine and skill. So when the kids came in, I was like, you guys are all getting your own plot of land. You can build your own house. I gave them an address. I tended to do it. It would be listed by the first street was Presidents, then Washington. So we went down and just did all the presidents, and then First Street, Second Street, Third Street, Fourth Street. So the kids had their own address, and they were so excited. They're like, I can build my own house, and I'm the neighbor of this person and a neighbor of this person. So it was pretty exciting for them. One thing when they do crafting, and I've submitted to Microsoft to see if they'll make a change. But if you're familiar with Minecraft, they do crafting where you can take a block of wood that you chop down off a tree, and it converts into 4 boards. And then if you take 2 of those boards, it converts into 4 sticks. So right there, you can do a math problem and say, how many sticks can I get if I have one piece of that log of a tree? And so they could do the math. But I submitted to Microsoft saying, can you make a block where when it breaks down, it breaks into 10s. So it'd break into 10 boards. And then at 10 boards, you could put one in and break into 10 sticks. And it would be a good way to sort of, again, give that concrete example of regrouping in mathematics or doing subtraction in that. So, but right now it's just a set of 4. You can sort of do the same type of thing. If you take the log, it breaks down into a group of 4. So mathematical concept you can use in Minecraft. So this is the world before all the kids were in. Again, that's the school in the center of the world. Everybody had a plot of land. These red fences are specific to the Education Edition. They're blocks that the kids can't get over. So I fenced off everybody's area except for one entranceway in, just to again, I was thinking ahead of time, I'll try to reduce griefing. If there's only one way in, one way out, they should be able to tell who's coming in and out of their property. And then initially I had it going all the way around the village, but then I ended up just letting them go out and explore eventually. So that's what the village looked like. If you see, there's people around in the corners, and we'll go to that one next. So in the Education Edition, they're called NPCs. So the kids can go up to these NPCs, so there's subtraction help, addition help, and multiplication help. If they click on that, there's a button on there that says, if you need education help, click on this button, and it would take them out to a Khan Academy video for watching on subtraction, addition, and multiplication. And for addition, subtraction, for 4th grade, it went to a 3-digit help section. So none of the kids really used that when we were doing the worksheets and that, but it was there. It's an option to do. Yes? Those are NPCs in the Education Edition. So, I don't know the NPC. Yeah, okay, non-player character. Thank you. Yeah, they stand there all day long. They don't move. They don't do anything. They just stand there. So, yes, they're statues. So my first lesson after the tutorial world was you can get X, Y, Z coordinates every time you walk around if you have a map. And when I first saw that, I'm like, distance formula, midpoint formula, Pythagorean theorem, all this stuff. And I have 4 kids, and I was like, hey, let's do the Pythagorean theorem. They're like, boring. We don't want to do that. So when we did it in the class, I did a treasure hunt. So on each of their plots of land, I did, they would get this worksheet, and when they figured out the math problems, it would tell them where they had to dig to find a resource that they could start building their house with. So the kids were very engaged. The one thing was I gave the worksheet out at the start of class. So they're sitting in front of their computer. I give them a math worksheet. A lot of the kids were like, very motivated to get through it. But the teachers are like, if you give that to us earlier in the week, we can give it to them for homework. Then we're all set, and they can just play in that. So that's one of the things I learned while we were doing this pilot program was give the sheets to the classroom teacher early on in the week. They'll get it through. The kids will figure out the math, and then they can do the treasure hunt once they get in there. So it was great engagement, though. The kids were very excited to do it. Here's some of the kids after they had done it. They started building their houses. There were a couple kids that, I buried this stuff one layer down. So some of the kids that were a little challenged with mathematics, they solved the problem their own way. They started just digging the top layer off of every row. There was 900 blocks, but they started digging and they were just finding the resources like that. So, I mean, you definitely have kids that are going to go around the issues, go around the mathematics and just say, hey, I got another way I can solve this problem. So, so you got to sort of plan for that situation. So before an activity, before we'd get in the village world, I would have, again, I'm giving out worksheets earlier in the week. The teachers are having them do the math. So they would go into the world, and there's a math challenge section. So the kids, it's shaped just like their village, and the addresses are all the same for them, but they would go into this door, and they have to pull the levers down from the worksheet that are the correct answer. And if they pull the levers down, they'd be able to access, go into the door of this plot of land. And I'll show you what's inside. But it was basically a way of giving them math earlier in the week. They'd solve the problems, they'd pull the levers to get in, and they're able to go in. And again, probably 80 to 85% of the kids had the worksheet completely done by the time we started up on a Friday, because I'd only go in for 1 hour on a Friday with the classes. So when they went in, one of the first things we did a perimeter and area lesson, okay? So they had it in 3rd grade, they didn't really cover it in 4th grade, so we just did a lesson once they got through these doors. So it's, again, like a topic they wouldn't get until late in the year. We did mini lessons. They would complete the math challenge problems, and at the back of the door, the perimeter and area answers would be used to get them out of this math challenge part, and then they could go to their village and start building their house again. So, this is inside. You can see there's multiple, there's over that red fence, there's another plot of land, but inside here, they'd first walk in and they'd have a little, do your own lesson on area. So area is length times width. Length equals 3, width equals 2, 3 times 2 is 6, right? Or you could also put a sign and just count, just to show them that they could count the squares on the inside to get their area. And then there's also a perimeter one that was saying, okay, the formula for perimeter is 2 times length plus width, or count the sides. And I put a sign up to show how you count the sides, because you have to count each edge. Some kids started off there just counting the squares, but it's like you got to sort of count the edges in order to get the total perimeter. So when they did that, then they had 4 problems that they had to do. So this yellow one, they had to figure out the perimeter area on that. The white one, the 2 white ones, and that blue diamond one. They would figure out the perimeter area and then put a sign on those orange blocks to say, that's the perimeter area for this, that's the perimeter area for this. And then that back door had levers on it again, and whatever numbers matched to the correct answers on the perimeter area, they'd pull down. A back door would open. They'd have a trunk that would give them emeralds in Minecraft, which I told them that was our currency, and we'll get to a lesson later on where we start doing currencies, but emerald was a currency, and it was worth $100, so I'd give them two emeralds when they got that. And then, again, later on, I'll show you, but we did a price list for every resource, and then they could start giving out emeralds or other forms of currency that we had in order to buy the resources. But again, that was just a way to motivate them. So we did group activities to collaborate with projects. So the first one I did was this pyramid one. And it was more like very individual for the kids. So we run through a couple word problems, and then they get to build a pyramid, and then they got to build a bridge if they finish with enough time. But when they got through their problems, they said, can I build with my friend over here? Can we build on their property? Or I had built a river with their bridge, and kids were like, can we build together? And I said, hey, yeah, have at it. And I'll show you just some of the stuff that first I'll show you the word problems and some of the stuff that they did. So on this word problem, it's basically I gave them a chest full of flowers. And so I said, in the chest you will find flowers to plant. There are 3 tulips. There are 2 times as many dandelions as red tulips, 3 times as many daisies as dandelions, and 3 times as many pink tulips as red tulips. So then they had a plot of land where they got to plant the flowers and sort of figure out that word problem. Again, they're using the digital manipulatives, the flowers, for a concrete example of how to plant them in the garden to solve that word problem, which is a 4th grade type word problem. Another one, I said there's 32 rose bushes in the chest and 8 gardens. If the same number of roses are in each garden, how many roses will be in each garden? So the kids would go out, they'd take out 32 rose bushes, and they would just plant them one by one. But again, it was just giving them that strategy for when they had to solve that problem. But in Minecraft, they were just planting flowers. So they liked planting the rose bushes. So, but the big thing was when they got to these bridges, these kids, I mean, they didn't have much time to build these bridges, but and they weren't in like their creative mode. This was straight survival mode. They made, a group of kids made that one, a group of kids made that one down there, and they went all the way down this river. But the teachers came up to me after and they said, them working together was awesome. We haven't, sometimes they have difficulty working with each other, but that was great. One of the teachers said, there's this one kid who's very in class and is very, very much an extrovert, and there's another kid that was an introvert, and it swapped because the kid that was an introvert was an expert in Minecraft. When they were building this bridge, he was the one that was leading the bridge design and everything. So they said, let's do more collaborative lessons with them. So they worked together in teams. So I got the message. So the next thing we did was we did a team house building project. So I split them up into groups of 4, and they all had to, I put them in creative mode in this case, and they all had to build their house. So this is just one of the classes what they built. So you can see they did some structures. Some of them put gardens out. They put balconies off of these. There was one set of kids that they did a hidden room with something I had never seen that I didn't know I was able to do, but they put a picture over the doorway into it, and you couldn't see it, but they knew exactly where to go in to find their hidden room in that. So it was amazing what they had to do here, and then at the end of it, the math lesson was they had to figure out the perimeter and area of the footprint of their house and put it on a sign outside their house. And a lot of kids, they did that, and then they'd put down another sign that would say, this is, we'll see a sign, but the 3 kids put their names on the house. And then on the inside of the house, they also decorated the inside of the house. I mean, I gave them some time to do a lot of stuff. But at the end of this lesson, and I'll just run through the pictures. So that's the inside. They put some pictures up. They have a fireplace. They put a couple torches in for the fire. This actually, if you can see this, it's a couch made out of wood blocks, and they use the steps to put on the inside. But they have, if you look over here, if you're familiar, there's I forget the name, but it's like a little platform. You step on it, it'll open the door for their house and everything. So they were doing a lot of things that, again, in Minecraft they would normally do, but it was interesting to see. So again, this is, these guys, they put some gardens on the outside. They listed out, okay, our length is 7, our width is 4, so therefore our area is 28, perimeter is 22, and then they put down their names to show they're the ones that built that house. So just one thing, so I sort of after they finished this lesson, I had this great idea, and I did a pyramid type structure where the kids had to go into it, and they had one of these, pressure plates. So they had a pressure plate that could open up a door, but it was far away from the door, so that one kid had to basically step on the pressure plate to let everybody else through. And then once they got off the pressure plate, they couldn't get through, but the kids on the inside could open the door for them. So we had to sit, one time where one of the kids who stepped on the pressure plate, he couldn't get through, and the other kids were all going to the next part, and he's like, hey, let me in, I helped you guys get in. So they came back and let him in and everything, but they got through that in like, I don't even know how long it took them, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, they got through this pyramid that I thought was gonna take like, I'm like, this is gonna take 15 minutes, right? They got through it in, you know, maybe not 5 seconds, but 5 minutes. And then there wasn't, when they got inside, it was basically, I had like a treasure chest open up with like a pharaoh inside and, you know, all in gold and that. And one of the kids after was like, that wasn't that great, you know, like, wasn't that great of a lesson. And so basically my point is, a lot of the greatness of Minecraft is leave it sort of unstructured. Like, you can, you know, I could make lots of buildings and everything, but the kids, letting them build and then solve the problems and, you know, interject like the mathematics is really the way to go, because planning it too much and trying to have them follow a certain game rule tends not to make it that exciting for them. Because as an adult, what I think is exciting might not be exciting for a fourth grader. So taking that cue, I did this thing called the Pioneer Challenge. So I split the kids up into groups again. It's tough to see on that sign, but I'd say you have, inside each chest is a map. And on the map, it lists out what's your X, Y, Z coordinate for each of your, for that particular player that's holding the map. So I said, okay, you 4 kids, you guys are team 5, and you guys now have a plot of land on 1,228 for your X coordinate, 63 for your Y, and 473 for your Z. Go find your plot of land. I'll give you a couple tools, and you can start building your house. So that way they had to start from where they were, whatever the coordinates were for this village, all 5 teams, stay together as a group, go find that plot of land, and then start collecting resources. So they actually divvied up. When they got to that plot of land, they were like, okay, you guys start cutting down the trees, you guys go mining for stone, I'm gonna start, when you bring back stuff, I'm gonna start building the house. And they sort of had a design for the house. So again, it's one of those things where 21st century skills, they're collaborating, they're solving problems, they're team working. So this is one of the structures that they built. Again, this is not creative, this is strictly survival. So they're building stairs to get all the way up to the top, where they're going around and sort of jumping up to build this structure. Again, that's another one, a low down one with some glass, but I gave them, everybody had a little bit of a structure right next to some water, because I thought, you know, why not, right? So another project that we did as a group was we did a zoo. So I don't think I have the sheet. So on the sheet, it said, and they got to work on this earlier in the week, they broke them up into groups in the classroom, and for the zoo it said, you've got 15 chickens, 3 chickens per pen, and the pen has to be this length and this width, or this length and this area. So they had to figure out the perimeter and they had to figure out the width of it, right? Whatever other 2 numbers I didn't give, they had to figure it out. And then they also had to figure out if I have 15 chickens, I can only put 3 in a pen. You know, I need 5 pens in order to solve this, right? So while they're doing the zoo, I said, you guys can make a concession stand, you can make a fountain, you can do a path around, you can do park benches, you can do whatever you want. So, you know, once they finished, I was able to put the animals in there for them, but they did like a ticket booth. Like, it was just, again, like incredible to see them working together. The superintendent of Wine and Skill, Dr. Reardon, came into the classroom, and he talked to me after, and he said, you know, our 4th grade, this particular one class that you were in, has been having a lot of issues with kids not getting along with each other. And he said it was amazing to see, when he was in the classroom, the kids working on this zoo project and how they just worked together. They solved the problems to make their pens and everything. And, you know, he just said it was a good job overall. So that's just one example of a zoo. There's another example of a zoo. They all, you know, they put the fountains in the middle. You can see they started doing some flowers and that. There's polar bears in the game, so I gave them some polar bears, but they said, hey, the polar bears need snow. They put some snow in the middle there. And then another one that I did was a bridge and water challenge, right? So on this one, I gave them certain constraints. I said, you know, the bridge has to be this wide and it has to be this high off the water. But then I sort of left it open-ended as that, because again, the teachers wanted to see the open, the collaboration between the kids. So again, like the kids, you know, pretty impressive what they're able to do here. This is in creative mode, so they're able to fly around and do all this. This one was a group of girls built an underwater tunnel, so, you know, they put flowers along the side, they have a horse that was in there and everything. And then there's a group of boys who did an underwater, oh, I didn't get there. I'll show theirs. They did an underwater tunnel. So they built it. Of course, they put lava on the outside of it around just to make sure, it's got lava. But then the cool thing that I thought they did was they built this underwater tunnel, and then they ran water down in the tunnel. So there's water in there, and you have to take a boat across inside this underwater tunnel. So it was like, it was just one of those unexpected things where you're like, oh, it's pretty clever, like that's an interesting thing to do. But these guys, they if you know redstone, so you can like sort of do circuitry in Minecraft. On the other end of this tunnel is a secret door that if you pull the lever, it opens up on the side of this mountain. So it was pretty impressive that they're doing some engineering. Let me just go back and show. This team sort of did a Chesapeake Bay Bridge type design. So they have rails that would go around the outside, but then they also had rails where you could take a minecart down through the middle, and then it would come up and over, and then back down over onto the land. So again, the structures are pretty impressive that they were building. But like the one thing for a mathematical standpoint, when you start getting into like doing the slopes, right? I mean, you pretty much have a slope 1 over 1, right? Because you're going 1 block over, 1 block up. So you could sort of like, I was thinking like like making a pyramid, you could sort of say I want it to have a slope of, 2 over 1. So it's rising up 2, it's going over 1, 2 over, and sort of introduce that idea of slope with the kids. Rise over run. Unfortunately, like in Minecraft with the tracks, they're only going to go, if it goes flat, they'll go flat. So they really only can make like a slope with a minecart going down it at 45 degrees. So doing that 1 over 1, right? Because as soon as they go 2, that track goes like this, and then it goes flat, and then it'll go diagonal again. So that's basically what they did there. That's the tunnel. And then again, another couple bridges that they had done throughout. So in another one that we did was an amusement park challenge. So again, they had to make an amusement park. I sort of gave them, sky's the limit. You can make it as high as you want. You can do whatever you want with it. This was like one of the last lessons that we did in Gardner-Dickerson. So it was just sort of like a free-for-all. There wasn't a whole lot of math that we did in this one, but it was like, impress me. Let's see what you guys can do, right? So, they built this one. They built it with redstone tracks. They put redstone every so often to keep this track powered on, because if you don't use redstone torches, it won't stay powered on, and you might not be able to get all the way to the top. So these guys built a nice high one. These guys actually so they have a creeper design over here, and it's pretty. If you watch this, if you look at just this track design, it's pretty impressive what they've done, But then they get to the top of this ramp, the track drops off and will land on that track that's down below. So again, just from an engineering standpoint, they lined everything up. They got the tracks to work all the way around. And when I walk over here, can you guys still hear me? Am I loud enough? Okay, sorry. Again, another one where just good designs. Again, just running their tracks around. And I like this last one. It's from a sky view. But again, if you look at their track design, pretty complex. It's sort of, they swirl around. I don't know, they started swirling around here, getting bigger and bigger, and then they just went off, started doing a ramp and everything. And I think at this point, they end up going underground and coming back up over there. So it's pretty impressive just to watch the group. And with these classes, the director of technology, Erin Cheevers for Troy, she had said one time, I think when we were doing Minecraft, when the class was, we're in the computer room, class is it's getting loud, and she goes, "This is what engagement sounds like, because it's when you do this, the kids are all talking with each other, so it's gonna be noisy. It's not gonna be a silent class because these guys are like, what do you want to do over here? Let's build this out of stone. Let's build this out of wood. So you're getting that communication with the kids and everything. Let me see, what am I on time-wise? Okay, 11:30. So one of the things I did for Troy for one of their last lessons was an obstacle course. So an obstacle course with math problems. I designed it as you guys, I don't know if you've seen the show Wipeout, so it's very similar to the show Wipeout that we were trying to do with this. So we split them up into 2 teams. there's a gold and diamond team. So the gold is yellow on here and the diamond's the blue. So if you look, there's 3 doors in, like there's 3 doors in that gold one. So first floor, second floor, third floor. So if you started on the first floor, you have to start back here just to like sort of make it, you know, time-wise a little bit better. So the kids would start, first floor would start back here, second floor there, third floor there. 6 minutes or, I'm sorry. Oh, 15, sorry. So they would run into the room, and then in the room, so basically they had to get through here, and when they got all the way through the obstacles, I had like a mountain that they had to get up to the top of, and then when they ran in, whoever got there first would get the first place spot, and they had a certain number of points. Second place had a certain, you know, it went down as the further you got in. But it basically, the kids were, you know, pretty engaged in doing this. So I had 5 doors with 3 math problems each. So above the door it would say, you know, 5 times 5. So they had to pull down what the correct lever was. So somebody could randomly go through and just hit the levers to try to find it, but you had to do that 3 times for this particular door, and then another 4 doors after this. So if we're doing it for time, they were trying to figure it out, and you know, definitely they were practicing their math. They were engaged. There was one young kid who mathematically, again, like he was challenged in math, and he's like, hey, I'm solving this problem another way. I'm not doing the math. I'm not going in that door. So he, unbeknownst to everybody, dug a tunnel underneath the houses. He started going, and then he sort of lost his way. I don't know if he took a wrong turn. He came back out, ran all the way around, got to the top of the hill, 4th place. So he was like, hey, I'm in 4th place, you know. So we were, you know, we sort of like were impressed with, you know, hey, you know, he found a way to beat this obstacle, right? But again, like you got to have that in mind. Like, so that kid definitely, he didn't feel, I mean, we weren't giving him enough support. So he was like, I'm not figuring this out. I'm not getting any help. I'm just going to go around. So, you know, you sort of have to identify the kids that are going to need help and then provide that help while they're trying to do this type of lesson. So again, they'd run through here. Again, they're doing 15 math problems. And then all 3 of them would come out. So their particular team, the first floor, second floor, third floor would come out, and they'd have a maze. So all 3 of them would try to work through this maze. There's a parkour course that was over here, which they were excited to do. And then they had a horse race. They'd get over here, and there's stalls with horses in them that they had to jump over water and everything else. And then they'd get to the point where they could go up and climb the mountain. So exciting stuff there. Another one that I did was a fishing challenge. So this allowed us, we had the kids fish, and we introduced the concept of independent variables and dependent variables. So the kids all fished in the same spot. So we kept that one the same. What we did was we changed the weather and we changed the day. So we had them fish during the daytime. We had them fish during the daytime while it was raining. We had them fish at night, and we had them fish at night while it was raining. So we wanted to see what was the best time to go fishing. The kids wanted to know when was the best time to go fishing, because when they're playing survival, they want to know. So when they got their fish, the one thing you can do in Minecraft, they have an item frame, and you can put items into the frame. So it's sort of like, you know, you're going to make a picture with what you got. So the kids would catch these fish, and then they'd come over here after we do it for 5 minutes. They'd come over here, and they could put in all the fish that they caught on these item frames. So they're basically, you know, they're making bar graphs of the fish that they caught. And then the one thing you can, you know, you're talking to kids, oh, you want it to be descending. You know, you can sort of introduce that concept. But just sort of, you know, we did it for those 4 different times. We're introducing variables. And then at the end, I collected all the data, gave it to the teacher, and then I said, you guys can do whatever you want, but you can figure out average, you can figure out, you know, median. I mean, mode might not be able to do on here, but you can sort of do a data analysis on your fishing results and see when's the best time to catch fish. Now, I know everybody's probably like, when's the best time to catch fish? I can't tell. But it's at night when it's raining, so when you guys are playing, there you go. Again, like they're able to collect data that's meaningful to them, and then they're more engaged to solve the data or to do the analysis on it. The other thing I did was after they did all the fishing, because it didn't take up the total time, we did archery. So the students would take turns shooting arrows. They'd be in groups of 2, one person would spot to see, did the arrow hit the target, so there'd be a red dot, or did it miss it? And then they had to figure out their shooting percentage. So we had 3 different lines, so 3 different distances, and they had to figure out their shooting percentage. The number, the number that hit the target over the total number of shots that they had. So we were dealing with fractions, percentages, decimals, so just a view of what that looked like. They could be at the green line, they could be at the yellow line, and they were shooting at those red squares up there. Thanks. So you can see this is right behind where the fishing tournament was. One of the other things I did was I wanted to do like an ELA segment. So I said, what about having the kids sort of write a journal about what they're doing every day or what they're planning on doing the next day. So teachers were excellent, and they had to ask the kids to start doing some ELA assignments dealing with Minecraft. And one of the teachers said, I had no problem getting them to write, But this one little girl wrote, so this is what she wrote. But the one thing I thought was so cool, I read through this, it sort of describes what we did. But this last one is, the one feature for my house is I want my roof to be made of dirt so I can put a garden of flowers and seeds on top of my house. And again, I was like, I've never thought of that. Yeah, you could put that on top and you could have a garden on top of your house. And I just thought it was she does very good on writing that, but it was just sort of a creative way of building her house. And she wants it to stand out from everybody else's as much as possible. So there's that ELA aspect. So it's not strictly mathematics, but you can also have some ELA. And then you could also do some science as well. There's the sun is going across the sky. You can talk about east, west, north, south. You can drop things from a high height. There's a couple of items in Minecraft that do obey the law of gravity. So there's gravel, there's an anvil. So you can drop them from different heights and have the kids time it and see, sort of figure out what's the rate of gravity in Minecraft. And I've done it. It's different than what actual gravity is. But then the big thing that we did was at the end of the year, which I wanted to introduce it similar earlier, but I didn't get a chance. But we sort of came up with our Minecraft currency. We did an emerald for $100, prismarine crystal $10, a prismarine shard $1. So told the kids that because those are things that you can't really make you can't craft anything out of them. They're sort of tough to find in the world, so they made it for a good form of currency. So the students calculated the amount of money they would earn from, so basically the amount of money they would earn for collecting resources. So I took the kids and I split them up into groups and I said, okay, you guys are lumberjacks, you guys are miners, you got 5 minutes, go into your mine shaft, go into your lumber, your forest, and let's see how much money you guys make. So bring the resources back, I'll pay you for every resource that you have in emeralds, prismarine, crystals, and shards. And this one little girl was like, wow, this is like real life, I got a job now, so it was interesting. And, they had to calculate, so when they came back, they had to write out, I'll show you the next one. So I had an item list, so it had all the resources and how much I would give them for items. So that way they had to calculate, they're using addition and they're using multiplication to figure out how much money they made that particular 5-minute period. And then I would also say I gave you, 3 axes, 3 pickaxes. So I gave them all these materials. So I said, you're starting off with a deficit of $720 that you need to pay off the bank first. So they had that of I got a deficit and everything. So, and then I also gave them a budget with all the items, and I said, okay, I'm giving you guys $500. Here's what you can buy along the side. So again, they're listing out how to spend that $500. And again, one of the teachers came up to me and said it was very interesting. They were engaged in it. But you'd see one kid would be like, I'm buying a horse and a saddle, and they used up their $500. And other kids bought everything that they needed to build a house. So it was sort of interesting just to see that. And you could sort of, again, introduce some financial literacy type stuff. You don't want to spend all your money just on a horse, but a horse is pretty fun. So that's the jobs in the mining that I did. So at the end of the year, one of the best houses I thought that one of the kids had was this house. If you could go in there, it's pretty impressive, but they've got the bedroom upstairs, they've got a living room downstairs, they've got these columns at the entranceway. It was pretty amazing. Again, this is just the village at the end of the year when they're building with the resources that they've collected. So classroom challenges. So separate math world and village world. So the one thing with Minecraft was I initially had like a math challenge world and then the village world. But I needed 2 accounts in order to be able to do that with Minecraft Education Edition. So I ended up putting the math challenge world and the village world just to make it easier in that. Kids trying to get around rules, path of least resistance, you know, like the kid that's digging underneath. I mean, he's solving a problem, but he's not really doing the lesson. So it's sort of like trying to think of how could a kid get around this lesson and trying to set it up so that they are either have the resources, you know, to get in it or to get through it or to design it so they can't get around it, right? Pre-classroom worksheets, so give the classroom out to the teachers prior, and it gets done before they actually sit in front of the computer. Kids asking for help, I mean, it's amazing, like they would start on this. They would start on this and they would be raising their hands constantly. A lot of the times you just gotta be like, you can try this or you can do this problem, you know, because they're looking to do it as fast as possible because they wanna start building their village and that. What we talked about in the beginning, griefing, classroom rules still apply, so just every lesson you gotta sort of have that talk with them, that, you know, we gotta respect other people's property, whatever applies in the real world, we have to apply in Minecraft. And then the noise level will be higher in an engaged classroom, so it was, you know, that's just to be expected. And then tech challenges, so we use tablets and we use towers. The one thing was the tablets, they don't auto-update in Minecraft Education Edition. So the technology person was like, hey, I gotta go around and now I gotta get 50 tablets updated to the new version that just came out. And you know, that was one thing where the tower computers automatically would update to the newest version of Minecraft whenever they came out. So just something, it's not like they're coming out with new versions all the time, but just something to consider. Difficulty with sign-in, so there was always some difficulty with sign-ins to the Minecraft Education Edition. Very small percentage in the classrooms, but it was just something that we consistently would have. So again, something to think about there. And then the one thing that wasn't that great was when you save the world, like I'd have 30 kids in there, but it'd be in my account. So when I saved that world, I could only access that world if I was on that computer on my account. Like we could take that world and load it up to a network, but then if somebody else played it somewhere else, now that whoever was the last one on it was, that was the latest version of it. So that made it a little bit more difficult. There's a couple times where we lost some of the work that they did because someone, you know, opened it up and then the kids played on that one, but then we didn't know what computer they were using specifically and everything else. So, because some of the teachers would try to, you know, have the kids do this during the week. So, having a server is the way to go. But one of the things with the servers is the servers don't update to the most latest version of Minecraft Education Edition automatically either. So, another thing to know. Strengths, shy kids taking control, collaboration, digital citizens, you know, having that lesson on being a good digital citizen. Teaching moments when mistakes happened, engagement was through the roof. There was, one of the self-contained teachers brought her classroom in one day after these guys were out and wanted to try Minecraft and was completely impressed with how engaged the kids were. Some of the kids that are discipline issue, they were Minecraft experts, so they were leading the class on some of the stuff, and they wanted to show the teacher what they could do in the world. So, again, that engagement part of it. Excitement for doing math. I mean, it was sort of like a head fake. They were doing math to get through those doors, but they didn't seem to care. They were just trying to get through those doors. And then just teaching 21st century skills. So, does anybody have any questions? Yes, sorry. No, so the Minecraft Education Edition has lessons on there. I haven't posted any of my lessons onto the Education Edition, but I have to look into doing that. It's just, I finished up in June and I just haven't had a chance to really do that, but. Oh, thank you, thanks. Anybody else? That's good. All right, well, thank you very much for coming out. Appreciate it. All right, thanks.